The Frostborns Betrothed. Eowyn Aldrich had never feared the cold, though the cold had always watched her. But when winter came overnight unnatural, endless she felt it. The lake froze solid beneath an empty sky. The ground pulsed beneath her feet. And at the center of the storm, he stood silver-eyed, breath curling in the ice-thick air. "You were promised to me," he murmured. And winter never forgets its debts. Chapter 1. The Unnatural Freeze. The kettle whistled, a shrill, frantic sound that Eowyn usually found comforting. Today, it grated on her nerves. She'd risen before dawn, as she always did, to the familiar sounds of the old farmhouse creaking and settling around her. But this morning, an unsettling silence had followed. The usual chorus of birdsong was absent, replaced by a heavy, expectant quiet. She poured the boiling water over the dried herbs in her chipped ceramic mug, the steam momentarily clouding her vision. Eowyn Aldrich was a woman built for practicality, her hands calloused from years of working the land, her face weathered by sun and wind. At 58, her auburn hair, once vibrant, was now streaked with silver, a testament to a life lived fully, if not always easily. Her husband, Thomas, had passed 5 years ago, leaving her with a farm, the memories, and a quiet ache that never quite faded. She stepped onto the porch, mug warming her hands, and gasped. The world was wrong. The lake, usually a shimmering expanse of blue reflecting the vast sky, was a solid sheet of white. Ice. Thick, impenetrable ice, stretching as far as the eye could see. It wasn't the gentle frosting of a typical winter morning. This was the deep, bone-chilling freeze of mid-January, yet it was only October. The leaves on the ancient oak tree in her yard, still vibrant with autumnal hues just yesterday, were now encased in shimmering sheets of ice, each delicate vein perfectly preserved. A shiver ran down Eowyn's spine, a primal fear she hadn't felt since she was a child listening to her grandmother's old tales. Tales of the Frostborn, beings of immense power tied to the deepest winter, creatures of myth and legend. She'd always dismissed them as folklore, meant to scare children into behaving. But now the air grew colder, the temperature plummeting with an unnatural speed. Eowyn wrapped her thick woolen shawl tighter around her, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. The ground beneath her feet felt alive. A low, rhythmic pulse vibrated through the soles of her boots, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the earth. She walked towards the lake, her boots crunching on the frost-covered grass. The ice was impossibly smooth, reflecting the overcast sky like a distorted mirror. As she neared the edge, she saw him. He stood at the center of the lake, a figure seemingly sculpted from the ice itself. Tall and imposing, with hair as white as freshly fallen snow and eyes like chips of glacial ice, he radiated an aura of power that made the air crackle around him. He wasn't dressed in furs or heavy clothing, as any sane person would be in this unnatural cold. Instead, he wore garments that seemed to be woven from the very fabric of winter, shimmering with an ethereal, otherworldly light. Eowyn stopped, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wanted to run, to flee back to the relative safety of her farmhouse, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. A strange mixture of terror and fascination held her captive. He turned his head, those silver eyes locking onto hers. The intensity of his gaze was almost unbearable, a weight pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. He didn't smile, didn't frown. His expression was neutral, yet it held a depth of ancient knowing that made Eowyn feel profoundly small and insignificant. He took a step, the ice groaning faintly beneath his weight, but not cracking. And then another. He moved with an unnerving grace, gliding across the frozen surface, as if he were walking on air. With each step, the pulsing in the ground intensified, resonating with the frantic beat of her heart. He stopped a few feet away, the cold radiating from him like a physical force. Eowyn could feel the moisture in her eyes freezing, the sting of it forcing her to blink. The scent of pine and snow and something else, something ancient and untamed, filled the air around him. His voice, when he spoke, was like the cracking of ice on a winter's night, deep and resonant, yet strangely melodic. "You were promised to me," he murmured, the words hanging in the frozen air like a pronouncement of doom. "And winter never forgets its debts." Yoan's mind reeled. Promised? Debts? What was he talking about? She opened her mouth to speak, to demand an explanation, but only a choked gasp escaped her lips. The cold was seeping into her bones, making it difficult to think, to breathe. He tilted his head slightly, a flicker of something that might have been curiosity in those icy eyes. "You do not remember," he observed, his voice holding a hint of disappointment. "The pact. The ancient agreement. Your bloodline bound to mine." Bloodline? Yoan thought of her grandmother again, of the old stories, of the whispered warnings. She remembered a particular tale, one she dismissed as particularly fanciful, about a young woman in her family, generations ago, who had made a bargain with a being of winter to save her village from a famine. A bargain sealed in blood and ice. A wave of dizziness washed over Yoan. Could it be true? Could those old stories, those legends she'd so readily dismissed, be the reality she was now facing? Was this creature the Frostborn of her grandmother's tales? He took another step closer, and Yoan instinctively recoiled, a flicker of defiance sparking in her eyes. She might be old, she might be alone, but she was not weak. She had faced hardship and loss, and she would not surrender to fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed to say, her voice trembling despite her efforts to control it. "I owe you nothing." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a chilling expression that sent another shiver down her spine. "Denial will not change the truth, Yoan Aldrich. The dead is written in the ice, in the very air you breathe, and I have come to collect." He reached out a hand, his long, slender fingers tipped with what looked like claws of pure ice. Yoan flinched, but she didn't run. She stood her ground, her gaze locked on his, a storm of fear and defiance raging within her. The ice began to creep up her boots. Chapter 2. Whispers on the Ice. The ice, a creeping, insidious tendril of frost, snaked its way up Yoan's worn leather boots. It felt strangely alive, a sentient extension of the being standing before her. She looked down, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach, then back up at the Frostborn. His silver eyes held her captive, unwavering and intense. "Let me go," Yoan said, her voice stronger this time, fueled by a surge of adrenaline. "I've done nothing to you." He remained silent for a moment, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in every detail of her appearance, the lines etched on her face by time and hardship, the silver threading through her auburn hair, the stubborn set of her jaw. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the eerie creaking of the ice and the frantic beating of her own heart. "Nothing?" he finally echoed, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. "Your ancestors made a promise, a sacred oath, and you, Yoan Aldrich, are the last of their line." He gestured with a hand, and a swirling vortex of snow and ice materialized beside him. Images flickered within the vortex, ghostly and indistinct, yet undeniably powerful. Yoan saw glimpses of a desperate village, starving people huddled together against a relentless blizzard. She saw a young woman, her face pale but resolute, standing before a figure shrouded in frost and shadow. She saw a hand outstretched, a drop of blood falling onto the ice, freezing instantly into a crimson jewel. The images vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving Yoan breathless and shaken. The story her grandmother had told her, the one she had dismissed as mere folklore, was playing out before her very eyes. "I don't believe in old wives' tales," Yoan said, but her voice lacked conviction. The evidence, the sheer power emanating from this being, was undeniable. "Belief is irrelevant," the Frostborn countered, his voice devoid of emotion. "The pact exists, regardless of your acceptance. Your ancestor, Alara, swore an oath to bind her bloodline to mine, in exchange for the survival of her people. She offered a bride, a companion for the long winter." The The word bride hung in the air, heavy and chilling. Eowyn felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She was no bride. She was a widow, a farmer, a woman who had lived a full life, a life she was not ready to surrender. That was generations ago, Eowyn protested, her voice rising in desperation. It has nothing to do with me. Time has no meaning in the realm of winter, the Frostborn said. The pact is eternal, unbroken. And you, Eowyn, are the one who must fulfill it. He took another step closer, the ice around her boots tightening its grip. Eowyn felt a surge of panic. She had to escape, to get away from this creature and his chilling claim. No, she said, shaking her head vehemently. I refuse. I won't be your prisoner. A flicker of something that might have been amusement crossed his face. Prisoner? Is that what you think this is? I offer you a place at my side, a share in the power of winter. A life beyond the constraints of your mortal existence. Eowyn scoffed. A life of eternal cold? No, thank you. I prefer my own life, even with its hardships. He studied her for a long moment, his silver eyes searching, probing. You fear the cold, Eowyn Aldrich, he observed softly. But the cold is not your enemy. It is a part of you, a part of this world. It is a force of purification, of renewal. It is beautiful. He extended his hand again, his icy fingers reaching towards her. Come with me, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Let me show you the wonders of winter, the secrets that lie hidden beneath the ice. Let me show you yourself. Eowyn hesitated. His words, his tone, were strangely alluring. She had always felt a connection to the winter, a sense of peace and solitude in the stark beauty of the frozen landscape. But this was different. This was a surrender, a relinquishing of everything she knew and loved. She looked past him, towards her farmhouse, a small, sturdy beacon of warmth and familiarity in the vast expanse of white. She thought of the life she had built there, the memories she had made, the simple joys and sorrows that had shaped her into the woman she was. I can't, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I won't. The Frostborn's expression hardened, the gentleness vanishing like a fleeting thaw. You have no choice, Eowyn. The pact is binding. You are mine. He moved with lightning speed, his icy hand closing around her wrist. A jolt of intense cold shot through her, searing her skin like a brand. Eowyn cried out, struggling against his grip, but it was like trying to break free from steel. The ice beneath her feet began to crack, fissures spreading outwards like a spiderweb. The pulsing in the ground intensified, growing into a deafening roar. The world around her dissolved into a swirling vortex of white. The farmhouse, the trees, everything disappearing into the blinding blizzard. Eowyn felt herself being pulled, dragged across the ice towards the center of the lake, towards the heart of the unnatural winter. She fought with all her strength, but it was futile. The Frostborn's power was overwhelming, his grip unbreakable. As she was swept away, she caught one last glimpse of her home, a tiny speck of warmth in the encroaching darkness. A single tear froze on her cheek, a testament to her fear, her defiance, and her utter helplessness. The whispers of the ice, once faint and distant, now surrounded her, echoing the Frostborn's chilling claim, a constant reminder of the ancient debt she was now forced to pay. The last thing she saw before the white consumed her was his eyes. Silver and so cold. Chapter 3. The Frostborn's Claim. The world was a blur of white, a roaring vortex of wind and ice that stole Eowyn's breath and battered her senses. She felt weightless, as if she were flying, yet she knew she was being dragged across the frozen surface of the lake, the Frostborn's grip on her wrist an unbreakable chain. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the chaos, but the cold seeped into her very bones, chilling her to the core. She could feel the ice forming on her eyelashes, her hair, her clothes, turning her into a living statue of frost. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the chaos ceased. The roaring wind died down, the swirling snow settled, and Eowyn found herself standing on solid ground, or rather, solid ice. She opened her eyes, blinking against the sudden stillness, and gasped. She was no longer on the lake. She was elsewhere. The landscape was breathtakingly beautiful, yet utterly alien. Towering spires of ice, sculpted into intricate shapes by the wind and frost, reached towards a sky that shimmered with an ethereal, otherworldly light. Giant snowflakes, as large as her hand, drifted lazily through the air, sparkling like diamonds. The air was still and silent, devoid of any sound except for the faint, rhythmic pulsing that she had felt on the lake, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very heart of this frozen world. The Frostborn stood beside her, his grip on her wrist still firm, but no longer painful. He released her, and Eowyn instinctively stepped back, rubbing her wrist where the skin was red and raw from his touch. Where are we?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "My domain," he replied, his voice echoing in the stillness. "The heart of winter. A place beyond the reach of mortal men." He gestured with a hand, and the ice around them shimmered, revealing a path that led towards a magnificent palace, constructed entirely of ice. It was a breathtaking sight, its walls sparkling with an inner light, its towers reaching towards the heavens like frozen flames. "Come," he said, his voice softening slightly. "You are cold. You need warmth." Eowyn hesitated. She was cold, shivering uncontrollably, her teeth chattering. But the thought of entering that icy palace, of being further ensnared in this strange, frozen world, filled her with dread. "I want to go home," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The Frostborn's expression remained impassive. "This is your home now, Eowyn. You are bound to me, to this place. You cannot escape your destiny." "I don't believe in destiny," Eowyn retorted, a spark of defiance flickering in her eyes. "I believe in choice, and I choose to go home." He tilted his head slightly, studying her with those intense silver eyes. "Choice is an illusion, Eowyn, especially for those who are bound by ancient pacts. You will learn to accept your fate. In time." He turned and began walking towards the palace, his movements fluid and graceful. Eowyn watched him go, her mind racing. She had to find a way out, a way to break this connection that bound her to him. She looked around, searching for any sign of escape, any crack in this frozen prison. But there was nothing. Only ice, stretching as far as the eye could see, a vast, impenetrable barrier. She was trapped. With a sigh of resignation, Eowyn began to follow the Frostborn, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. She had no choice. For now, she had to play along, to bide her time, to learn more about this creature and his world. As she walked, she noticed details she hadn't seen before. Strange, luminous plants grew in the crevices of the ice, their delicate petals shimmering with an ethereal glow. Tiny, winged creatures, resembling butterflies made of ice, flitted through the air, leaving trails of sparkling frost in their wake. The palace itself was even more magnificent up close. Its walls were carved with intricate designs, depicting scenes of winter landscapes, mythical creatures, and ancient battles. The entrance was guarded by two massive ice wolves, their eyes glowing with an eerie blue light. The Frostborn stopped before the entrance, waiting for her. "Welcome to Winter's Hold," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "My home. And now yours." Eowyn said nothing, her gaze fixed on the ice wolves. They seemed to be watching her, their silent scrutiny adding to her unease. The Frostborn gestured, and the massive ice doors of the palace swung open, revealing a vast hall filled with a soft, blue light. The air inside was surprisingly warm, a stark contrast to the frigid landscape outside. He stepped inside, beckoning her to follow. Eowyn hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and entered the palace. The doors closed behind her with a resounding boom, sealing her fate. She could only hope she wouldn't lose herself entirely in this icy, beautiful, terrifying place. The warmth, though welcome, felt like another layer of the trap. Chapter 4. Echoes of a Forgotten Pact. The warmth inside Winter's Hold was a deceptive embrace. While it eased the biting chill that had sunk deep into Eowyn's bones, it also served as a constant reminder of her captivity. This wasn't the comforting warmth of a hearth fire, it was a controlled, almost artificial heat, a testament to the Frostborns' power. The hall was vast and breathtaking. Pillars of ice, carved with intricate patterns of frost and snow, soared towards a vaulted ceiling that shimmered with a soft, blue light, mimicking the aurora borealis. The floor was a smooth expanse of polished ice, reflecting the light like a still, frozen lake. The Frostborn, whose name she still didn't know, led her through the hall, his footsteps silent on the ice. Eowyn followed, her senses on high alert, taking in every detail of her surroundings. She noticed that the palace, despite its icy construction, was not devoid of life. Strange, luminous plants grew in alcoves and along the walls, their delicate petals unfurling in the warmth. "What is your name?" Eowyn asked, breaking the silence. Her voice echoed slightly in the vast hall. He stopped, turning to face her. His silver eyes, usually so cold and impassive, held a flicker of surprise. "You may call me Lorcan," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very ice beneath their feet. Lorcan. The name sounded ancient, powerful, and strangely fitting. Eowyn repeated it silently, trying to find some connection to the old stories, some clue that might help her understand him, and perhaps find a way to escape. "Lorcan," she said aloud, testing the name on her tongue. "Why did you bring me here? What do you want from me?" He resumed walking, leading her towards a smaller chamber off the main hall. "I have already told you," he said. "You are bound to me by the pact. You are to be my companion, my bride." Eowyn bristled at the word bride. "I am not your bride," she retorted. "I am a prisoner." Lorcan stopped before a large, arched doorway, its frame carved with intricate depictions of winter scenes. "You will understand in time," he said. "The pact is not merely a bond of obligation. It is a connection, a sharing of power. You will come to see the benefits of this union." He pushed open the doors, revealing a chamber that was both opulent and strangely comforting. The walls were lined with shelves filled with ancient-looking books and scrolls. A large fireplace, carved from a single block of ice, dominated one wall, a fire burning within it, casting a warm, flickering glow. The flames, however, were not orange and red, but a cool, ethereal blue. A table stood in the center of the room, laden with food and drink. There were platters of roasted meats, bowls of steaming soup, and flagons of a clear, sparkling liquid that looked like melted ice. "You must be hungry," Lorcan said, gesturing towards the table. "Eat. Replenish your strength." Eowyn hesitated. She was hungry, her stomach growling after the ordeal she had been through. But she was also wary. She didn't trust Lorcan, and she didn't trust this opulent prison he had brought her to. "I'm not hungry," she said, crossing her arms defiantly. Lorcan sighed, a hint of weariness in his voice. "Eowyn, you cannot fight this. You cannot deny your fate. The sooner you accept it, the easier it will be for both of us." He walked towards the table, pouring himself a cup of the sparkling liquid. He took a sip, then offered the cup to her. "Drink," he said. "It will warm you." Eowyn eyed the cup suspiciously. "What is it?" "It is called frost wine," Lorcan replied. "It is made from the sap of the ice blossoms that grow in my domain. It is nourishing." She cautiously took the cup, her fingers brushing against his. His skin was surprisingly warm, not cold as she had expected. She brought the cup to her lips, sniffing the liquid cautiously. It had a faint, sweet scent, like pine needles and winter air. She took a small sip. The frost wine was surprisingly delicious, a blend of sweet and tart flavors that sent a wave of warmth through her body. She couldn't help but take another sip, and then another, until the cup was empty. Lorcan watched her, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Better?" he asked. Eowyn nodded, feeling a warmth spread throughout her body. A warmth she hadn't felt since she was a young girl, safe in her mother's arms. Suddenly, the memory flooded her with a vivid intensity. Her grandmother, sitting by the fire, telling her the story of Alara and the Frostborn. The details, previously hazy and dismissed, now sharpened with a terrifying clarity. Alara, desperate to save her village from starvation, had pleaded with the Frostborn for aid. He had agreed, but at a price. A life for a life. A bride to share his eternal winter. Alara, with no other options, had agreed, offering not herself, but a future descendant, a promise sealed in a drop of blood on the ice. Eowyn looked at Lorcan, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. The story, it wasn't just a story. It was a prophecy, a curse, a debt that had now come due. And she was the payment. The room spun. Chapter 5. The Village of Whispering Pines. The room, with its ice-carved fireplace and blue flames, swam back into focus. Eowyn gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, the aftertaste of frost wine a strange sweetness on her tongue. The realization of her grandmother's tale, the reality of Alara's pact, crashed down on her with the force of an avalanche. "You knew," she said, her voice a shaky whisper, accusing Lorcan. "You knew all along, and you let me think I had a choice." Lorcan's expression remained unchanged, a mask of serene composure that infuriated Eowyn. "Choice is a luxury mortals cling to," he said. "The pact was made. The debt was incurred. I am merely collecting what is owed." "But it wasn't my debt," Eowyn exclaimed, pushing herself away from the table. "It was generations ago. It's not fair." "Fairness," Lorcan said, a hint of coldness creeping back into his voice, "is another mortal construct. Winter is not fair. It is simply what it is. And you, Eowyn, are now a part of it." He gestured towards the shelves of books and scrolls. "If you wish to understand, to learn more about the pact, about your ancestors, about us, you will find answers here. Knowledge is power, Eowyn, even in a place like this." Eowyn glared at him, her anger battling with a growing sense of despair. She was trapped, bound to this creature, this Lorcan, by a pact she had no part in making. But she was not defeated. She would not surrender. "I want to see it," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "The village, where this pact was made." Lorcan raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his silver eyes. "Whispering Pines?" he asked.
"Why?"
"Because I need to understand," Eowyn said. "I need to see the place where my family's fate was sealed. I need to feel it." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense and probing. "Very well," he finally said.
"But know this, Eowyn.
The past can be a dangerous place, especially when it is intertwined with the power of winter." He turned and walked towards a large window, carved from a single sheet of ice. It offered a panoramic view of the frozen landscape, a breathtaking vista of ice spires, shimmering snowfields, and a sky ablaze with the aurora borealis. "Whispering Pines lies beyond the Frostborns Mountains," Lorcan said, pointing towards a distant range of towering peaks, their summits shrouded in mist. "It is a long journey, even for one such as I. But I will take you." Eowyn approached the window, gazing at the forbidding landscape. The Frostborns Mountains looked imposing, their jagged peaks piercing the sky like the teeth of some monstrous beast. The journey would be perilous, she knew, but she was determined. She had to see Whispering Pines, to confront the ghosts of her past, to find some way to break free from this icy prison. "When do we leave?"
she asked.
Lorcan turned to face her, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Now," he said. He extended his hand, and a swirling vortex of snow and ice materialized beside him, similar to the one he had used to bring her to Winter's Hold. Eowyn hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. This was another leap of faith, another step deeper into the unknown. But she had no choice. She had to see Whispering Pines. She had to find a way to reclaim her life, to break the ancient pact that bound her to Lorcan and his eternal winter. She took a deep breath, steeling her resolve, and stepped into the vortex. The world dissolved into a blinding whiteness, the roar of the wind filling her ears. She felt the familiar sensation of weightlessness, of being swept away by an irresistible force. As she traveled, Images flashed through her mind. Her grandmother's face, lined with worry and regret, Alara, standing before the Frostborn, making her desperate plea the village of Whispering Pines, shrouded in snow and shadow. The journey was shorter this time, or perhaps it only seemed that way because Eowyn was prepared for it. When the vortex dissipated, she found herself standing on solid ground, the cold air biting at her exposed skin. She looked around, her heart sinking. Whispering Pines was not the quaint, picturesque village she had imagined. It was a desolate, abandoned ruin, a ghost town swallowed by the encroaching winter. The buildings were crumbling, their roofs collapsed under the weight of the snow. The streets were deserted, covered in a thick layer of ice. The only sound was the mournful whisper of the wind as it snaked through the skeletal remains of the village. A single, twisted pine stood at the village's center, its branches groaning. The wind seemed to carry voices. Chapter 6. Secrets in the Frozen Earth. The wind whipped around Eowyn, carrying with it the whispers of the past, the echoes of a village that had once thrived, now reduced to a frozen graveyard. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the creaking of the ancient, twisted pine at the village center and the mournful howl of the wind as it snaked through the ruined buildings. Lorcan stood beside her, his expression unreadable, his silver eyes surveying the desolate scene. He seemed unaffected by the cold, by the desolation, as if he were merely observing a landscape he had seen countless times before. This is it?" Eowyn asked, her voice barely a whisper, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "This is Whispering Pines?" Lorcan nodded. "It has been many years since mortals dwelled here." Eowyn walked slowly through the ruined village, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. She touched the crumbling walls of a building, her fingers tracing the outlines of what had once been a window. She could almost feel the presence of the people who had lived here, their hopes, their dreams, their fears, all now buried beneath the ice and snow. "What happened to them?" she asked, turning to Lorcan. After Alara made the pact?" Lorcan hesitated, his gaze shifting towards the distant mountains. "They were relocated," he said. "To a warmer place, a place where they could thrive. The Frostborn kept their promise." Eowyn frowned. "Relocated? Or banished?" He didn't answer, his silence confirming her suspicion. The villagers of Whispering Pines had been forced to leave their homes, their ancestral lands, all because of a pact made generations ago. A pact that now bound her to this creature of winter. She continued her exploration of the village, her heart heavy with a sense of loss and injustice. She came to the center of the village, where the ancient, twisted pine tree stood, its branches gnarled and bare, reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. This, she realized, must be the place where Alara had made her pact with the Frostborn. She could feel it, a lingering energy in the air, a sense of ancient power and desperation. She touched the trunk of the tree, her fingers tracing the rough bark. The wood was cold, almost frozen, yet she could feel a faint pulse beneath her fingertips, a faint echo of the life that had once flowed through it. As she touched the tree, a vision flashed through her mind. She saw Alara, standing before the Frostborn, her face pale but resolute. She saw the drop of blood falling onto the ice, freezing instantly into a crimson jewel. She heard Alara's voice, clear and strong, making the oath that bound her bloodline to the Frostborn. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Eowyn breathless and shaken. She staggered back, her hand flying to her chest, her heart pounding. What was that?" she asked, turning to Lorcan. He was watching her, his expression concerned. It was a strange, unfamiliar look on his usually impassive face. "The tree, it holds memories," he said. "Echoes of the past. It is a conduit to the power of the pact." Eowyn stared at the tree, her mind racing. If the tree held memories, if it was a conduit to the power of the pact, could it also be the key to breaking it? She approached the tree again, her determination renewed. She had to find a way, a loophole, some way to undo the ancient agreement that bound her to Lorcan. She placed her hand on the trunk of the tree again, closing her eyes, focusing her mind. She reached out with her senses, searching for something, anything that might help her. She felt the pulse of the tree, the faint echo of Alara's voice, the presence of the Frostborn. She delved deeper, pushing past the surface memories, searching for the core of the pact, the source of its power. And then she found it, a hidden detail, a forgotten clause, buried deep within the fabric of the agreement. A way out. Her eyes snapped open, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. She turned to Lorcan, her voice trembling with emotion. "There's a way," she said. "A way to break the pact." Lorcan's expression hardened, his silver eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" "The pact, it's not unbreakable," Eowyn said. "There's a condition, a loophole. Alara, she made sure of it." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "The pact can be broken if the Frostborn, if you willingly release me." Lorcan stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. The wind picked up, swirling around them, the whispers of the past growing louder, more insistent. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble. She knew she had struck a nerve, unearthed a secret he had hoped to keep buried. The frozen earth itself seemed to react to her words. Chapter 7. The Mark of Winter. Lorcan's reaction was immediate and visceral. The air around him crackled with power, the temperature plummeting even further. The swirling snow intensified, forming a miniature blizzard that whipped around them, obscuring the ruined village. His silver eyes, usually cool and distant, now blazed with an icy fire. "You dare," he growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. "You dare to speak of breaking the pact? You know nothing of what you ask." Eowyn stood her ground, despite the fear that clawed at her throat. She had come this far, unearthed this secret, and she would not back down now. She had to try. "I know that Alara made a provision," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but firm. She wouldn't have condemned her descendants to an eternity of servitude without a way out. "The pact can be broken if you release me." "Willingly." Lorcan took a step towards her, his hand reaching out, his fingers tipped with what looked like claws of pure ice. Eowyn flinched, but she didn't retreat. "You think I would simply let you go?" he said, his voice dripping with scorn. "After all this time? After the pact has been fulfilled? You are mine, Eowyn. You belong to me." "I belong to no one," Eowyn retorted, her voice rising in defiance. "I am my own person, and I will not be your prisoner." He stopped mere inches from her, his icy breath washing over her face. Eowyn could feel the cold radiating from him, seeping into her bones, threatening to freeze her from the inside out. "You are bound to me," he said, his voice a soft, menacing whisper. "By blood, by ice, by the ancient laws of winter. You cannot escape your destiny." He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. Eowyn shivered, not entirely from the cold. There was something possessive in his touch, something that sent a shiver of fear, and something else down her spine. "Look," he said, his voice softening slightly. He gestured towards her arm, the one he had gripped when he first brought her to his domain. Eowyn looked down. On her wrist, where his icy fingers had held her, there was a mark. It wasn't a bruise or a scar, but a delicate, intricate pattern of frost, shimmering on her skin like a tattoo. It was beautiful, yet terrifying, a permanent reminder of her captivity. "The Mark of Winter," Lorcan said. "A symbol of our bond. A sign that you are mine." Eowyn stared at the mark, her heart sinking. It was another layer of the trap, another way in which he had claimed her. She tried to rub it away, but it was no use. It was embedded in her skin, a part of her now. "It doesn't change anything," she said, her voice weaker now, her defiance faltering. "I still want to go home." Lorcan's expression softened, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Home," he echoed, the words sounding strangely foreign on his tongue. "You think you can go back to your old life? After this? After experiencing the power of winter, after being touched by the Frostborn?" He shook his head slowly. "You're changed, Eowyn. You can never be the same. The Mark of Winter is not just a symbol, it is a transformation. You are becoming one of us. Eowyn felt a wave of despair wash over her. Was he right? Was she changing? Was she losing herself to this icy world, to this creature of winter? She looked at the mark on her wrist again, at the delicate, intricate pattern of frost. It was beautiful, undeniably so. And a part of her, a small, treacherous part, felt a strange attraction to it, to the power it represented. No, she thought fiercely. She wouldn't let it happen. She wouldn't let him win. She would find a way to break free, to erase the mark, to return to her own life, her own world. There has to be a way, she whispered, more to herself than to Lorcan. There has to be something I can do. Lorcan watched her, his expression unreadable. He didn't offer any hope, any comfort. He simply stood there, a silent, imposing figure, a constant reminder of her captivity. The wind howled around them, the whispers of the past growing louder, more insistent. The snow swirled, obscuring the ruined village, the frozen landscape. Eowyn felt lost, alone, and utterly helpless. But even in her despair, a tiny spark of hope remained. She had found the loophole in the pact, the condition for her release. Now, she just had to find a way to make Lorcan want to let her go. A seemingly impossible task. But she would not give up. The mark shimmered, a challenge. Chapter 8. A Dance with Shadows. The journey back to Winter's Hold was silent and strained. The swirling vortex transported them swiftly, but the emotional distance between Eowyn and Lorcan felt wider than the frozen wastes that separated them from her former life. The mark of winter on her wrist pulsed with a faint, cold energy, a constant reminder of her changed state, of Lorcan's claim. Back in the Ice Palace, Lorcan led her not to the library, but to a vast ballroom. The chamber was breathtaking in its scale and artistry. Pillars of ice, carved with intricate scenes of winter revelry, supported a vaulted ceiling that shimmered with 1,000 points of light, like a frozen night sky. The floor was a mirror of polished ice, reflecting the light and creating an illusion of infinite space. "Why are we here?" Eowyn asked, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. Lorcan didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured towards the center of the room. A lone figure stood there, seemingly made of shadows and ice. As they approached, Eowyn saw that it was a woman, tall and slender, with hair as black as night and eyes that glittered like shards of obsidian. She wore a gown of shimmering black ice that seemed to flow and shift like liquid shadow. "This is Nyx," Lorcan said, introducing the woman. "She is a resident of Winter's Hold, an advisor, a friend." Nyx inclined her head slightly, her dark eyes studying Eowyn with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "The mortal who carries the mark of winter," she said, her voice a soft, melodious whisper that seemed to slither through the air. "An interesting development." Eowyn bristled at the term mortal, but she held her tongue. She sensed that Nyx was not someone to be trifled with. There was an aura of ancient power about her, a darkness that was both alluring and terrifying. "Nyx has a gift," Lorcan said. "She can see possibilities. Futures. She can offer guidance." Eowyn looked at Lorcan, then at Nyx, her suspicion growing. Guidance? Or manipulation? Nyx smiled, a chilling expression that didn't reach her eyes. "The two are often intertwined, mortal. Especially in the realm of winter." "I don't need your guidance," Eowyn said, turning to Lorcan. "I know what I want. I want to go home." Lorcan sighed, a hint of weariness in his voice. "Eowyn, you're being stubborn. You refuse to see the potential of this situation. Nyx can help you understand. She can show you." "Show me what?" Eowyn interrupted. "Show me how to be a good little ice queen. Show me how to forget my life, my home, my freedom." Nyx glided closer, her movements fluid and graceful, like a shadow dancing on the ice. "Freedom is an illusion, mortal," she said.
"We are all bound by something."
"By fate, by duty, by desire. The question is, what are you willing to embrace?" She reached out and touched the mark of winter on Eowyn's wrist. A jolt of cold energy shot through her, making her gasp. Images flashed through her mind, visions of power, of beauty, of a life beyond the constraints of mortality. She saw herself standing beside Lorcan, ruling over the winter realm, wielding the power of the Frostborn. The images were seductive, alluring, tempting her with a glimpse of a life she had never imagined. But then, another image surfaced. Her farmhouse, her garden, the familiar warmth of the sun on her skin, the faces of her friends, the laughter of children, the simple joys of her mortal life. Io-In pulled her hand away, her heart pounding. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Those are not my desires. That is not my life." Nyx's smile widened, a hint of amusement in her dark eyes. "Are you sure, mortal? The power of winter is strong. It can be addictive." "I am stronger," Io-In said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I will not be seduced by your illusions." Lorcan watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be caught between his desire to keep Io-In by his side and something else. A flicker of respect? Of understanding? "Nyx," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Leave us." Nyx bowed her head slightly, a hint of mockery in her gesture.
"As you wish, my lord," she said.
"But remember, mortal, the shadows are always watching." She melted back into the darkness, disappearing as quickly as she had appeared, leaving Io-In and Lorcan alone in the vast ballroom. "Why did you bring me here?" Io-In asked again, her voice softer now, her anger replaced by a growing sense of unease. Lorcan walked towards a large window, carved from a single sheet of ice. He gazed out at the frozen landscape, his back to her. "I wanted you to see another perspective," he said. "To understand that this life is not simply a prison. It is an opportunity." He turned to face her, his silver eyes searching hers.
"I know you are afraid, Io-In.
I know you miss your home. But I am not a monster. I am not your enemy." He took a step closer, his voice lowering. "I am lonely, Io-In. The winter is long and cold. And the pact, it was not meant to be a punishment. It was meant to be a partnership." His words, his tone, were surprisingly vulnerable. For the first time, Io-In saw a glimpse of the being beneath the icy exterior, the loneliness that haunted him. It was a loneliness she understood, a loneliness she had felt herself since Thomas had passed. A dance with shadows, indeed. Both she and this creature were dancing with their own. Chapter 9. The warmth of a cold embrace. Lorcan's confession, his unexpected vulnerability, hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge across the chasm of their vastly different worlds. The vastness of the ballroom suddenly felt less intimidating, the shimmering ice less cold. Io-In studied him, searching his face for any sign of deception, but found only a raw, unsettling honesty. "Lonely?" she echoed, the word a soft question in the stillness. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor, as if ashamed of admitting such a weakness. "The Frostborn, we are not meant to be solitary creatures. We are bound to the winter, to its cycles, to its essence. But we are also individuals, with our own desires, our own needs." He looked up again, his silver eyes meeting hers. Alara understood this. She knew that the pact would be a burden, a sacrifice. But she also believed that it could be something more. A connection. A companionship. Io-In thought of her own loneliness, the quiet ache that had settled in her heart after Thomas's death. She had filled her days with work, with the routines of farm life, but the nights were long and empty. She understood the yearning for connection, for someone to share the silence with, to share the burdens and the joys of life. "But you force me," she said, her voice softer now, the anger fading. "You didn't give me a choice." Lorcan sighed, running a hand through his snow-white hair.
"I know," he said.
"And I regret that. I acted out of desperation, out of a fear of being alone for eternity. I saw the pact as a solution, a way to fulfill my destiny and to ease my loneliness." He took a step closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "But you are different, Io-In. You are not what I expected. You are strong, resilient, compassionate. You challenge me. You make me think." He reached out a hand, hesitantly, as if unsure whether she would accept his touch. Eowyn didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She allowed his fingers to brush against her cheek, the warmth of his skin a surprising contrast to the icy coldness of his domain. "I don't want you to be my prisoner, Eowyn," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want you to be my companion, my equal, my friend." The word friend hung in the air, a fragile offering, a tentative step towards reconciliation. Eowyn searched his eyes, seeking any hint of falsehood, but found only sincerity. She took a deep breath, her heart still pounding, but the fear was receding, replaced by a cautious hope. She had found the loophole in the pact, the condition for her release. But now, faced with Lorcan's vulnerability, with his offer of friendship, she found herself hesitating. Could she truly walk away? Could she return to her old life, knowing that he was here, alone in his icy kingdom? Could she find a way to bridge the gap between their worlds, to forge a connection that was not based on obligation, but on choice? I don't know, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "It's a lot to process. I need time." Lorcan nodded, withdrawing his hand. "I understand," he said. "I will give you all the time you need. I will not force you. I will not make the same mistake again." He gestured towards a smaller chamber off the ballroom, a cozy-looking sitting room with a fireplace burning with blue flames.
"Stay here," he said. "Rest. Think.
And when you are ready we will talk. We will find a way." Eowyn nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. She entered the sitting room, the warmth of the fire enveloping her like a comforting embrace. She sat down in a plush armchair, gazing into the flames, her mind racing. Lorcan's confession had changed everything. It had shattered her image of him as a cold, unfeeling monster and revealed a glimpse of the complex, lonely being beneath. It had also given her a new perspective on the pact, on the possibility of a connection that was not based on obligation, but on mutual understanding. She still wanted to go home, to return to her familiar life. But a part of her, a small, growing part, felt a pull towards this strange, icy world, towards this enigmatic creature of winter. A warmth, strangely, in his cold embrace. She looked at the mark of winter on her wrist. It no longer seemed solely like a brand of ownership. Perhaps it could be something more. The fire crackled, and the flames seemed to whisper possibilities. Chapter 10. Broken Bonds and Icy Chains. Days turned into weeks within the shimmering confines of winter's hold. Eowyn found a rhythm, a strange and unsettling routine within the Ice Palace. She spent hours in the library, poring over ancient texts and scrolls, learning about the history of the Frostborn, the intricacies of the pact, and the lore of the Winter Realm. She discovered that the Frostborn were not merely creatures of myth, but a race of beings deeply connected to the natural world, to the cycles of ice and snow, to the balance of the elements. They were guardians of winter, protectors of the frozen lands, and wielders of immense power. She also learned more about Lorcan, about his long life, his responsibilities, and his loneliness. She read of his past triumphs, his struggles, and his deep connection to the land. She began to understand his perspective, his motivations, and his yearning for companionship. Lorcan, true to his word, did not pressure her. He gave her space, allowing her to explore the palace, to read, to think, to come to terms with her new reality. He would often join her in the library, silently reading beside her, or in the sitting room, sharing stories of his past, of the Winter Realm, of the creatures that dwelled within it. Their conversations were tentative at first, cautious explorations of each other's thoughts and feelings. But gradually, they became more open, more honest, more intimate. Eowyn found herself sharing her own stories, her memories of Thomas, her life on the farm, her joys and sorrows. She learned that Lorcan had never known love, never experienced the warmth of human connection. He had been raised in isolation, trained from a young age to embrace his destiny as a Frostborn, to control his powers, to protect his realm. He had witnessed countless winters, seen civilizations rise and fall, but he had always remained alone. The mark of winter on her wrist, once a symbol of captivity, began to feel different. It still pulsed with a faint, cold energy, but it no longer felt like a chain. It felt like a connection, a bond. But even as she grew closer to Lorcan, even as she began to understand him, to care for him, the desire to go home remained. She missed the warmth of the sun on her skin, the smell of the earth, the familiar sights and sounds of her farm. One evening, as they sat together by the blue fire in the sitting room, Eowyn finally voiced her conflicted feelings. "Lorcan," she said, her voice hesitant. "I understand you better now. I understand the pact, the connection between us. But I still miss my home. I still yearn for my old life." Lorcan looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I know," he said softly, "and I cannot deny you that. I promised you freedom, and I will honor that promise." He stood up, walking towards the window, gazing out at the frozen landscape. "The pact, it can be broken," he said, "as you discovered. But it is not a simple matter. It requires a ritual, a severing of the bond, a release of power." He turned to face her, his expression grave. "It is dangerous, Eowyn. For both of us. The release of such ancient energy, it could have unforeseen consequences." Eowyn's heart pounded in her chest. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't realized the risks involved. What kind of consequences?" she asked. Lorcan hesitated. "The balance of winter could be disrupted," he said. The very fabric of this realm could be damaged. And you could be harmed. The mark of winter, it is a part of you now. Removing it, it could be painful, perhaps even fatal." Eowyn stared at him, her mind reeling. The choice she had longed for, the freedom she had craved, was now within her reach. But it came at a price that could be far greater than she had imagined. She looked at the shimmering mark, the bond, the chain. It was all so muddied, so complex. I don't know what to do," Eowyn confessed, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The warmth of the room felt suddenly cold, the blue flames offering little comfort. The choice was hers, but the consequences were terrifying. Chapter 11. The Heart of the Blizzard. The weight of Lorcan's words settled upon Eowyn like a fresh snowfall, heavy and suffocating. The choice, once a beacon of hope, now seemed like a treacherous path through a blinding blizzard. Stay, bound by a pact and a growing, confusing connection to Lorcan, or risk everything his realm, her life, for a return to a home that might no longer feel like her own. "Fatal?" she whispered, the word catching in her throat. The mark of winter, which had shifted from a symbol of imprisonment to a complex emblem of their unusual bond, suddenly felt alien and threatening again. Lorcan's gaze was filled with a sorrow that mirrored her own turmoil. "It is a possibility," he admitted, his voice heavy. "The energy that binds us is ancient and powerful. Severing it is like tearing a piece of the very fabric of winter. There is always a risk." He walked towards her, stopping just short of touching her, his hands clenched at his sides. "But," he added, his voice softer now, "there is also a chance that it will work, that you will be free, and that the balance will hold." He looked at her, his silver eyes searching hers, a silent plea hidden within their depths. Eowyn knew what he was asking, what he was offering. He was willing to risk his own realm, his own well-being, to give her the freedom she craved, even if that freedom meant losing her forever. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the crackling of the blue flames in the fireplace. Eowyn's mind raced, weighing the options, the risks, the potential losses. She thought of her farmhouse, of the empty chair by the hearth, of the life she had left behind. But she also thought of Lorcan, of his loneliness, of his unexpected vulnerability, of the strange, undeniable connection that had grown between them. If we do this," she said, her voice trembling slightly, what would it entail? This ritual?" Lorcan took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for what he was about to say. "It must be performed at the source of the pact," he said. "At the ancient pine in Whispering Pines. At the heart of the blizzard." Eowyn frowned. "The heart of the blizzard? But there is no blizzard there. It's just ruins. Frozen but still." Lorcan shook his head. The blizzard is not always visible, Eowyn. It is a manifestation of the pack's power, a swirling vortex of energy that lies dormant, waiting to be awakened. The ritual, it will awaken it. He explained further, detailing the steps they would need to take, the words they would need to speak, the sacrifices they would need to make. He would need to channel his power, to draw upon the very essence of winter, to unravel the threads of the pact that bound them together. Eowyn would need to surrender, to release her fear, her anger, her attachment to him, to willingly sever the connection, to embrace the unknown, to trust in the possibility of freedom. It will be intense, Lorcan said, his voice barely a whisper. You will feel everything. The cold, the power, the pain of separation. But you must be strong, Eowyn. You must let go. Eowyn looked at the mark of winter on her wrist, at the delicate, intricate pattern of frost. It pulsed with a faint, cold energy, a tangible representation of the bond she was about to break. Could she do it? Could she face the heart of the blizzard, the raw power of winter, the pain of letting go? Could she risk everything for a chance at freedom? A freedom that might leave her more alone than ever before? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to find the strength, the courage, the resolve she needed. She thought of Alara, of her sacrifice, of her desperate plea to the Frostborn. She thought of Thomas, of his love, of his belief in her strength. She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting Lorcan's. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. I'll do it. Lorcan nodded, a flicker of relief and sadness in his eyes. He knew what this decision meant, what it could cost them both. But he would honor her choice. He would face the blizzard with her. The journey to Whispering Pines felt different this time. The swirling vortex was charged with a heightened energy, a sense of anticipation and dread. As they stepped out onto the frozen ground, the air crackled with power. The ruins of the village were no longer silent. The wind howled, whipping the snow into a frenzy, creating a swirling vortex of white that obscured the sky. The heart of the blizzard had awakened. Chapter 12. Revelations in the Frost. The blizzard raged around them, a furious maelstrom of wind and ice that threatened to tear them apart. Visibility was near zero, the swirling snow obscuring everything except the faint, ethereal glow of Lorcan's form beside her. He held her hand, his grip firm and reassuring, a lifeline in the chaos. The ancient pine, once a skeletal silhouette against a still landscape, now thrashed violently in the wind, its branches groaning under the strain. It seemed to pulse with a dark, vibrant energy, the very air around it crackling with power. We must reach the tree, Lorcan shouted over the roar of the wind, his voice strained. It is the nexus, the focal point of the pact. They struggled forward, leaning into the wind, battling the force of the blizzard with every step. The cold was intense, biting at their exposed skin, seeping into their bones, threatening to freeze them from the inside out. Eowyn could feel the mark of winter on her wrist burning, a searing pain that was both physical and emotional. As they neared the tree, Eowyn saw something that made her heart stop. Figures, shadowy and indistinct, were swirling within the blizzard, circling the tree like wraiths. They were not human, not entirely. They seemed to be made of ice and shadow, their forms shifting and changing with the wind. What are they? She shouted, her voice filled with fear. Guardians, Lorcan replied, his voice grim. Protectors of the pact. They will not make this easy. The shadowy figures lunged towards them, their icy claws outstretched, their eyes glowing with an eerie blue light. Lorcan pushed Eowyn behind him, raising his hand, unleashing a blast of pure winter energy that sent the guardians reeling. Stay close to me, he said, his voice strained. I will protect you. He battled the guardians, his movements fluid and graceful, his power immense. He summoned walls of ice, hurled bolts of frost, and created swirling vortexes of snow to deflect their attacks. But they were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless, their attacks growing more ferocious with each passing moment. Eowyn watched him, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. She had never seen him like this, so powerful, so fierce. He was fighting for her freedom, risking everything to break the pact that bound them together. She realized, with a sudden clarity, that she could not simply stand by and watch. She had to help him. She had to contribute to her own liberation. She focused her mind, reaching out with her senses, searching for something, anything she could use. She remembered the ancient texts she had read in the library, the lore of the Frostborn, the connection between their power and the natural world. She looked at the mark of winter on her wrist, at the delicate, intricate pattern of frost. It was a symbol of the pact, but it was also a source of power, a connection to the very essence of winter. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, focusing on the mark, on the cold energy that pulsed within it. She visualized the blizzard, the swirling snow, the raw power of winter. She imagined herself drawing that power into herself, channeling it, using it to aid Lorcan. She opened her eyes, her body tingling with a strange, unfamiliar energy. She raised her hand, pointing it towards the guardians, and something extraordinary happened. A wave of frost emanated from her hand, spreading outwards, engulfing the shadowy figures. The frost was not destructive, not like Lorcan's attacks. It was calming, soothing, slowing them down, freezing them in place. Lorcan looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise and something else.
Pride?
Ah, Biowen, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I can help, she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. I can feel it. The power of winter, it's a part of me now. Together, they battled the guardians, their powers complementing each other, their combined strength pushing back the shadowy figures. Eowyn's frost slowed them down, while Lorcan's attack shattered them, dispersing them into the swirling snow. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the last of the guardians were defeated. The blizzard still raged, but the immediate threat was gone. They stood before the ancient pine, exhausted but victorious. The tree pulsed with power, its branches thrashing, its roots digging deep into the frozen earth. Now Lorcan said, his voice hoarse. We must begin the ritual. He explained the final steps, the words they would need to speak, the release of power that would sever the bond between them. He warned her again of the risks, of the pain, of the potential consequences. Eowyn nodded, her heart pounding, her body trembling.
She was ready.
She had come this far, faced the guardians, embraced the power of winter. She would not back down now. She would complete the ritual. The wind became a voice, and within that voice, a single, clear word. Remember. Chapter 13. The Price of Defiance. Remember. The word echoed in Eowyn's mind, a whisper carried on the howling wind, a command that resonated deep within her soul. Remember what? The life she was fighting to reclaim? The pain of loss? Or the unexpected connection she had forged with Lorcan? The ancient pine pulsed with a vibrant, almost overwhelming energy. Lorcan stood beside her, his face pale but resolute, his silver eyes fixed on the swirling vortex of snow that surrounded the tree, the heart of the blizzard. Are you ready? He asked, his voice barely audible above the roar of the wind. Eowyn nodded, her throat tight with a mixture of fear and regret. She had fought for this, for her freedom, but now, standing on the precipice of that freedom, she felt a profound sense of loss. Lorcan placed his hand on the trunk of the tree, his fingers splaying across the rough bark. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, drawing upon the power of winter, channeling it through his body, into the tree. The tree responded, its branches thrashing even more violently, the ground beneath their feet trembling. The blizzard intensified, the wind screaming, the snow swirling around them like a living entity. Eowyn placed her hand on the tree, beside Lorcan's, feeling the raw power surge through her, a jolt of intense cold that made her gasp. The mark of winter on her wrist burned, a searing pain that was both physical and emotional. Now Lorcan said, his voice strained. We must speak the words of release, the words of severance. He began to chant, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. The words were ancient, powerful, laden with the weight of centuries, the echoes of a forgotten language. Eowyn joined him, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger as she spoke the words that would break the pact, sever the bond, set her free. As they chanted, the blizzard reached a fever pitch, the wind howling like a banshee, the snow blinding, the cold almost unbearable. Eowyn felt the power of the pact, the ancient energy that bound her to Lorcan, struggling against their efforts, resisting the release. She felt a sharp, agonizing pain in her wrist, as if the mark of winter were being ripped from her skin. She cried out, her voice lost in the roar of the wind. Lorcan faltered, his eyes snapping open, his face contorted with pain. He looked at her, his gaze filled with despair. "Eowyn," he gasped. "I can't hold it back." The power surged, overwhelming them, threatening to tear them apart. The tree groaned, its branches cracking, its roots ripping from the frozen earth. Eowyn felt herself being pulled, dragged towards the center of the blizzard, towards the heart of the pact. She saw Lorcan struggling to maintain control, his body shaking, his face pale and strained. She knew, with a sudden, terrifying certainty, that he was losing. The power was too great, the pact too strong. He could not break it alone. And then she remembered. The whisper on the wind. Remember. She remembered Alara, her ancestor, her sacrifice, her desperate plea to the Frostborn. She remembered Thomas, his love, his belief in her strength, his unwavering faith in her. She remembered Lorcan, his loneliness, his vulnerability, his unexpected kindness. She remembered the connection they had forged, the bond that had grown between them, the possibility of something more. And she realized, with a clarity that pierced through the chaos, that she did not want to be free. Not like this. Not at this cost. She reached out, grabbing Lorcan's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. She looked at him, her eyes filled with love. A love born of shared hardship, of mutual understanding, of an undeniable connection that transcended the boundaries of their vastly different worlds. "Stop," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the roar of the wind. "Stop the ritual." Lorcan stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Eowyn, what are you doing?" "I don't want to go," she said. I want to stay. With you." The words hung in the air, a fragile counterpoint to the raging blizzard, a testament to the unexpected, transformative power of love. Lorcan's expression shifted, from disbelief to hope.
To joy.
He squeezed her hand, his grip tightening. Are you sure?" Eowyn nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I'm sure," she said. "I've found a new home, a new family. With you." Together, they focused their will, their combined power, not on breaking the pact, but on controlling it, on calming the blizzard, on soothing the ancient tree, on reaffirming their bond, but on their own terms. Slowly, gradually, the blizzard began to subside. The wind died down, the snow settled, the chaos receded. The tree ceased its thrashing, its branches stilling, its roots settling back into the frozen earth. The price, though, was etched into the very air around them. The village was gone. Completely. Not even ruins remained. Only smooth, undisturbed ice, reflecting the now clear sky. A blank slate. Chapter 14. The thaw begins. The silence that followed the storm was profound, almost unnerving. The howling wind, the crashing ice, the raging blizzard all had vanished, leaving behind an eerie stillness that felt both peaceful and empty. The village of Whispering Pines, or rather, the memory of the village, was gone.
Erased.
A chilling testament to the power they had wielded, to the choice they had made. Lorcan and Eowyn stood hand in hand, their bodies trembling from the exertion, their minds reeling from the emotional turmoil. The mark of winter on Eowyn's wrist still pulsed, but the pain was gone, replaced by a faint, warm tingling. It no longer felt like a chain, but a connection. A bond. Willingly embraced. Lorcan looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and love. A love that mirrored her own. A love that had defied the ancient pact, the raging blizzard, to the very boundaries of their worlds. Eowyn, he said, his voice hoarse, his throat tight with emotion.
You saved me.
You saved us. Eowyn shook her head, tears streaming down her face, freezing instantly in the cold air. We saved each other, she said. We found a way. Together. He pulled her close, embracing her tightly, his body trembling against hers. Eowyn clung to him, burying her face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of pine and snow, and something uniquely him. A scent that no longer felt alien, but comforting.
Familiar.
I was so afraid, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of being alone again. I know, Eowyn said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. But you're not alone. You'll never be alone again. They stood there for a long moment, embracing in the silence, drawing strength and comfort from each other's presence. The frozen landscape around them, once a symbol of desolation and despair, now seemed different. It was still cold, still stark, but it was also beautiful. And it was theirs. Slowly, gradually, they began to walk back towards the place where the vortex had brought them, their steps slow and deliberate, their hands still intertwined. As they walked, Eowyn noticed something subtle, but significant. The ice beneath their feet was changing. It was no longer a solid, impenetrable sheet. It was softening, melting, revealing patches of bare earth beneath. Tiny green shoots, braving the cold, were pushing their way through the frozen ground, reaching towards the sky. Lorcan, she said, her voice filled with wonder.
Look.
He followed her gaze, his eyes widening in surprise. He knelt down, touching the bare earth, his fingers tracing the delicate green shoots. It's a thaw, he said, his voice barely a whisper. A sign of change. A new beginning. The thaw was not widespread, not yet. It was localized, confined to the area around where the village had stood, where they had performed the altered ritual. But it was a start, a sign that the balance was shifting, that the power of winter was yielding, making way for new life, new growth, new possibilities. Eowyn smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes, chasing away the lingering shadows of fear and doubt. She looked at Lorcan, at his face, softened by the thaw, by the love that shone in his silver eyes.
We did it, she said.
We changed the pact. We changed everything. He nodded, his gaze locking with hers, a silent understanding passing between them. They had not broken the pact, not entirely, but they had transformed it. They had rewritten the terms, redefined the connection, forged a new bond, based not on obligation, but on choice. On love. As they stepped back into the swirling vortex, ready to return to winter's hold, Eowyn felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging, a sense of hope. She was no longer Eowyn Aldrich, the widow, the farmer, the woman bound by an ancient debt. She was Eowyn, the companion of the Frostborn, the catalyst of change, the harbinger of a new spring. A thaw had begun, not just in the frozen earth, but within her heart. And she knew, with a certainty that warmed her from the inside out, that this was just the beginning. The very air shimmered with unspoken potential. Chapter 15. Scars of the Past. The return to Winter's Hold was marked by a quiet understanding, a shared sense of accomplishment, and a nascent hope for a future yet undefined. The palace, once a symbol of Eowyn's captivity, now felt different. While still a breathtaking edifice of ice and snow, it held a warmth, a subtle resonance of the love that had bloomed amidst the blizzard. Lorcan, ever attentive, led her to the sitting room with the blue-flamed hearth. He conjured warm drinks, a richer, sweeter version of frost wine, and they sat in comfortable silence, recovering from the ordeal. The events at Whispering Pines, the near breaking of the pact, the complete obliteration of the village, had left them both emotionally and physically drained. The village, Eowyn began, breaking the silence, her voice tinged with regret. It's gone.
Completely.
Lorcan nodded, his gaze distant, his expression etched with a sadness that mirrored her own. It is the price of tampering with such ancient forces, he said. The pact was tied to that place, to the very earth it stood upon. Our alteration severed that connection, and the village dissolved. But the people, Eowyn said, her voice filled with concern. The villagers Alara's people, they were safe, weren't they? You said they were relocated. Lorcan hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. They were, he said, his voice carefully neutral. To a warmer place. A place where they could thrive. But Eowyn, having grown attuned to his nuances, his subtle shifts in expression, sensed a withholding. A shadow of something unsaid. Lorcan, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Tell me the truth. The whole truth. He sighed, running a hand through his snow-white hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of his inner turmoil. The truth, he said, his voice low, is often complicated, especially when it spans centuries. He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resignation. The villagers were relocated, he confirmed. But it was not a peaceful transition. They were forced to leave. They were exiled. Eowyn's heart sank. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed, hearing the pain in Lorcan's voice, made it all the more real.
Why?
She asked. Why were they exiled? Lorcan hesitated again, his gaze dropping to the floor. Because they resisted, he said. They clung to their home, to their traditions, to their connection to the land. They did not accept the Frostborns' gift. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a deep, ancient sorrow. They saw it as a curse, Eowyn. A betrayal. And they fought against it. But the Frostborn, we were ruthless. We were determined to enforce the pact. To secure our future. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. My ancestors, they were not kind, he confessed. They were powerful, but cruel. They believed that the ends justified the means. And they paid a heavy price for that belief. Eowyn reached out, taking his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. She felt the coldness of his skin, but also the warmth of his humanity, the vulnerability that he had hidden for so long. And you? She asked softly. Do you believe that? Do you believe that the ends justify the means? He looked at her, his silver eyes searching hers. I used to, he said. I was raised to believe it. To uphold the traditions, to protect the realm, to enforce the pact. But you have shown me another way. A better way. He squeezed her hand, his grip tightening. You have shown me the value of compassion, of understanding, of love. You have changed me, Eowyn. You have healed me. Eowyn's heart ached for him, for the burden of his past, for the scars of his ancestors' actions. She knew that those scars ran deep, that they could not be erased easily. But she also knew that they could be healed. With time, with understanding, with love. She leaned in, pressing a kiss to his cheek, a gesture of comfort, of acceptance, of a love that transcended the boundaries of their vastly different worlds. We all carry scars, Lorcan, she said softly. Scars of the past, scars of loss, scars of choices we regret. But those scars, they don't define us. They are a part of us, but they are not all of us. She smiled at him, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes, chasing away the lingering shadows of doubt and regret. We can learn from the past, she said. We can build a better future. Together. The blue flames in the fireplace flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating their faces, reflecting the hope, the nascent love that had bloomed amidst the ice and snow. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer wounds. They were reminders. Reminders of the price of cruelty, of the power of compassion, and of the transformative potential of love. And they were ready to heal them. Together. Chapter 16. A glimmer of hope. The following days were a period of quiet reflection and tentative exploration. Eowyn and Lorcan spent hours talking, sharing their pasts, their hopes, their fears. They delved deeper into the history of the Frostborn, searching for ways to mitigate the harshness of their legacy, to find a path towards a more balanced, more compassionate future. Eowyn, with her innate connection to the earth, began to explore the possibilities of extending the thaw, of bringing life back to the frozen lands. She discovered that the mark of winter, now a symbol of their shared power and willing bond, allowed her to influence the cycles of ice and snow, to nudge the balance towards warmth, towards growth. Lorcan, initially hesitant, gradually embraced her efforts. He saw the potential for renewal, for a future where the Frostborn were not feared, but respected, where they were not rulers of a frozen wasteland, but guardians of a thriving ecosystem. One day, as they were exploring the palace gardens of vast expanse of ice sculptures and luminous frost-covered plants, Eowyn noticed something unusual. A single, small flower, unlike any she had seen before, was blooming amidst the ice. It was a delicate, vibrant bloom, its petals a shade of deep crimson, a stark contrast to the surrounding white and blue. "Lorcan," she said, her voice filled with wonder.
"Look."
He followed her gaze, his eyes widening in surprise. He knelt down, examining the flower closely, his fingers tracing its delicate petals. "It's a sunstone bloom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I have never seen one before. They are legendary, said to bloom only in places where the balance between winter and spring is perfect, where hope blossoms amidst the ice." Eowyn's heart skipped a beat. A sunstone bloom, a symbol of hope, a sign that their efforts were bearing fruit. "Literally. It's beautiful," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Lorcan looked at her, his silver eyes shining with a warmth that rivaled the blue flames of the hearth. "It is," he agreed.
"Like you."
He reached out, gently tucking a strand of her auburn hair, now almost fully silvered, behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, his touch sending a shiver of warmth through her body. "Owen," he said, his voice soft and tender. I know I have made many mistakes. I have caused you pain. But I want you to know that I love you." The words hung in the air, a fragile confession, a testament to the transformative power of their shared journey. Eowyn's heart overflowed with emotion. She had never expected to hear those words, to feel this connection, this love. "I love you too, Lorcan," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I never thought I could love again. But you have shown me that it's possible. That even amidst the ice and snow love can bloom." He leaned in, pressing his lips to hers, a gentle, tender kiss that sealed their bond, their shared future. It was a kiss that tasted of hope, of renewal, of a love that had defied the odds, that had blossomed amidst the heart of winter. As they broke apart, Eowyn noticed something else. More sunstone blooms were appearing, dotting the ice garden with splashes of vibrant crimson. The thaw, it seemed, was spreading. "It's working," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "Are our efforts, they're working?" Lorcan smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that lit up his face, chasing away the lingering shadows of his past. "Together," he said, we are making a difference." They continued their work, exploring the palace, the surrounding lands, searching for ways to extend the thaw, to bring life back to the frozen realm. They discovered ancient texts, forgotten rituals, hidden pathways that led to the sources of untapped power. They learned to work together, their powers complementing each other, their bond strengthening with each passing day. Eowyn's connection to the earth, her ability to nurture growth, combined with Lorcan's control over winter, his ability to shape the ice and snow, created a synergy, a force for change that was unstoppable. A glimmer of hope, once a faint flicker, was now a growing flame, illuminating their path, guiding their efforts, warming their hearts. The future was still uncertain, the challenges remained, but they were no longer alone. They had each other, and they had hope. The sunstone blooms, a testament to their love and their efforts, continued to spread, a promise of a brighter, warmer, more balanced future. A future where winter and spring could coexist, where love could conquer all. Chapter 17. The fury of winter unbound. The burgeoning thaw, the proliferation of sunstone blooms, the deepening love between Eowyn and Lorcan, it all seemed like a fairy tale unfolding. But fairy tales, especially those intertwined with ancient magic and powerful beings, rarely have simple, untroubled paths. The balance of winter, so carefully maintained for centuries, had been disrupted. And there were forces that would not let that disruption stand. The first sign of trouble came in the form of tremors. Minor at first, almost imperceptible, they gradually increased in intensity, shaking the ice palace, rattling the ancient texts in the library, disturbing the peaceful stillness of winter's hold. Lorcan, attuned to the rhythms of his realm, felt the disturbance deeply. His brow furrowed with concern, his silver eyes clouded with a growing unease. "Something is wrong," he said, his voice low and troubled. "The balance, it is shifting too quickly. The power of winter, it is unraveling." Eowyn, though less sensitive to the subtle shifts in the magical energies, felt the tremors, the growing unease that permeated the palace. She saw the worry in Lorcan's eyes, the tension in his posture, and she knew that something was amiss. "What is it?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "What's happening?" Lorcan hesitated, his gaze shifting towards the vast windows that overlooked the frozen landscape. I do not know for certain," he said, "but I fear that we have awakened something. Something ancient. Something powerful." As if in answer to his words, a deafening roar echoed through the palace, shaking the very foundations of winter's hold. The tremors intensified, the ice walls cracking, the luminous frost-covered plants wilting. Lorcan rushed to the window, his eyes widening in disbelief and fear. Eowyn followed, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. Outside, the landscape was transformed. The gentle thaw, the patches of bare earth, the vibrant sunstone blooms, all were gone. The land was once again a frozen wasteland, covered in a thick layer of ice and snow. But this was not the peaceful, serene winter they had come to know. This was a winter unbound, a raging blizzard, far more intense than the one they had faced at Whispering Pines, swirled across the land, obscuring the sky, blotting out the light. Giant figures, made of ice and shadow, far larger and more terrifying than the guardians they had encountered before, stalked through the storm, their eyes glowing with an eerie blue light. And at the center of the blizzard, a figure, even larger and more imposing than the others, stood silhouetted against the swirling snow. It was a being of immense power, its form shrouded in frost and shadow, its eyes burning with a cold, furious light. "The Winter King," Lorcan whispered, his voice filled with dread. "He has awakened." Eowyn stared at the figure, her heart sinking. She had read about the Winter King in the ancient texts, a being of immense power, the embodiment of winter's fury, the guardian of the frozen realm. He was a creature of legend, a force of nature, a being that could not be reasoned with, that could not be controlled. What does he want?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Lorcan shook his head, his face pale and strained. "He wants to restore the balance," he said. To undo what we have done. To plunge the realm back into eternal winter." The Winter King raised his hand, and the blizzard intensified, the wind howling like a banshee, the ice cracking and groaning. The giant figures, his lieutenants, began to march towards the palace, their footsteps shaking the ground, their icy claws outstretched. "He is attacking," Lorcan said, his voice tight with urgency. We must defend ourselves. We must protect the palace." He turned to Eowyn, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Stay here," he said. "Stay safe. I will deal with this." But Eowyn shook her head, her heart filled with a fierce resolve. She would not stand idly by while Lorcan faced this threat alone. She had embraced the power of winter. She had forged a bond with him. She had chosen this life. She would fight for it. "No," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "We fight together. We face this together." Lorcan looked at her, his eyes searching hers, a flicker of hope in their depths. He nodded, his grip tightening on her hand.
Together, he said.
They stood side by side, facing the oncoming storm, the fury of winter unbound, the wrath of the Winter King. The palace shook, the wind howled, the ice cracked, but they did not falter. They were ready. They would fight for their love, for their future, for the balance they had sought to create. The fate of the realm, of their love, of everything, hung in the balance. Chapter 18. The Sunstone's Legacy. The Ice Palace groaned under the assault of the Winter King's forces. Giant ice shards rained down from the ceiling, the walls cracked and splintered, and the very foundations trembled. Lorcan and Eowyn stood defiant, their combined powers a bulwark against the raging blizzard and the monstrous ice figures that clawed at the palace walls. Lorcan summoned walls of ice, hurled bolts of frost, and created swirling vortexes of snow, battling the attacking figures with a ferocity Eowyn had only glimpsed before. But the Winter King's power was immense, his lieutenants seemingly endless, and the palace defenses were crumbling. Eowyn, drawing upon the mark of winter and her connection to the earth, tried to reinforce the palace walls, to slow the advance of the ice figures, to stem the tide of the raging blizzard. But her powers, though growing, were not yet strong enough to withstand the full fury of the Winter King. We can't hold them off much longer, Lorcan shouted over the roar of the wind, his voice strained, his body trembling from the exertion. The Winter King, he is too powerful. Eowyn saw the despair in his eyes, the acceptance of defeat. But she refused to give up. There had to be a way, a weakness, something they could use to turn the tide. She remembered the sunstone blooms, the flowers that had bloomed in the palace garden, the symbols of hope, of the perfect balance between winter and spring. She remembered the legends, the ancient texts that spoke of their power. The sunstone blooms, she shouted, her voice barely audible above the din. They hold the key. They represent the balance. We can use them. Lorcan looked at her, his eyes widening in understanding. The Sunstone's legacy, he said, his voice filled with a renewed hope. The ancient power that can counter the Winter King's fury. According to the legends, the sunstone blooms were not merely pretty flowers. They were repositories of solar energy, tiny vessels of warmth and light that could neutralize the power of winter, that could restore balance. But the blooms were delicate, fragile, easily destroyed. And they were few in number. They needed to find a way to amplify their power, to unleash their energy in a way that could counter the Winter King's assault. Eowyn remembered the library, the ancient texts, the forgotten rituals. There was one, she recalled, that spoke of a sunstone conduit, a device that could amplify the power of the blooms, that could channel their energy into a focused beam of warmth and light. The library, she shouted. There's a ritual.
A sunstone conduit.
We can use it. Lorcan nodded, his eyes gleaming with determination. Lead the way, he said. They battled their way through the collapsing palace, fighting off the ice figures, dodging the falling debris, their combined powers holding back the relentless assault. The journey was perilous, the palace crumbling around them, but they pressed on, their hope fueled by the possibility of the Sunstone's legacy. Finally, they reached the library, its ancient shelves shaking, its precious texts threatened by the encroaching ice. Eowyn frantically searched through the scrolls, her fingers flying across the brittle pages, her mind racing. Here, she said, her voice filled with excitement. I found it. The ritual of the Sunstone Conduit. The ritual was complex, requiring precise incantations, specific gestures, and a focal point, a lens through which the sunstone bloom's energy could be channeled. Lorcan, with his knowledge of ice crafting, quickly fashioned a lens from a large, clear piece of ice, shaping it with his power, imbuing it with the necessary magical properties. Eowyn gathered the few remaining sunstone blooms from the palace garden, their delicate petals trembling in her hands. She placed them around the ice lens, arranging them according to the ritual's instructions. They began to chant, their voices joining together, reciting the ancient words, performing the precise gestures, channeling their combined power into the sunstone conduit. The sunstone blooms began to glow, their crimson petals emitting a soft, warm light. The light intensified, growing brighter and brighter, until it was blinding. The ice lens focused the light, channeling it into a concentrated beam, a ray of pure solar energy that shot out from the library window, piercing through the raging blizzard, towards the figure of the Winter King. The effect was instantaneous. The blizzard faltered, the wind dying down, the snow melting. The ice figures staggered, their forms crumbling, their icy claws dissolving into water. The Winter King roared, his voice filled with fury and pain. The beam of solar energy struck him, forcing him back, weakening his power, disrupting his control over the storm. He was not defeated, not yet. But he was weakened. And the tide had turned. The very structure of the palace began to shift, reforming, healing. Hope bloomed, not just in their hearts, but in tangible reality. Chapter 19. Forging a New Destiny. The beam of solar energy, emanating from the makeshift sunstone conduit, held the Winter King at bay. His furious blizzard subsided, reduced to a swirling eddy of snow around his towering form. The monstrous ice figures crumbled, their icy essence dissipating into the air. The immediate threat to Winter's hold was diminished, but the confrontation was far from over. The Winter King, though weakened, still radiated immense power. His eyes, burning with a cold, furious light, fixed on Lorcan and Eowyn. He roared, a sound that shook the very foundations of the palace, a sound that spoke of ancient rage and betrayal. "You dare," he thundered, his voice echoing across the frozen landscape. "You dare to defy the natural order? You dare to tamper with the balance? You will pay the price for your insolence." Lorcan stepped forward, his own power flaring, a shield of ice forming around him and Eowyn. "We seek not to defy the balance," he said, his voice firm and unwavering, but to restore it. To create a harmony between winter and spring. To end the cycle of eternal cold. The Winter King scoffed, a sound like the cracking of glaciers. "Harmony? There is no harmony with winter. There is only submission. Only obedience." He raised his hand, and the remaining snow swirled around him, forming a vortex of icy energy. He was gathering his strength, preparing for another attack. Eowyn knew that they could not withstand another full-scale assault. The Sunstone Conduit had bought them time, had weakened the Winter King, but it was not a permanent solution. They needed to find a way to reason with him, to convince him that their vision of a balanced future was possible. She stepped forward, beside Lorcan, her hand reaching for his, their fingers intertwining. She looked at the Winter King, her eyes filled with not fear, but compassion. "We understand your anger," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the lingering roar of the wind. "You are the guardian of winter, the protector of the frozen realm. And we have disrupted that balance. We have challenged your authority." She paused, taking a deep breath, gathering her courage. "But we did not do it out of malice, out of a desire for power. We did it out of love. Out of a yearning for a world where winter and spring can coexist, where life can flourish, even amidst the ice and snow." She gestured towards the palace, towards a few remaining sunstone blooms, towards the faint signs of thaw that were still visible on the landscape. "We seek not to destroy winter," she said, "but to embrace it, to find a way to live in harmony with it, to appreciate its beauty, its power, without being consumed by it." The Winter King stared at her, his eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. The vortex of icy energy around him still swirled, but it seemed less intense, less threatening. He lowered his hand, the swirling snow settling, the immediate threat receding. He looked at Lorcan, then back at Owen, his gaze searching, probing. "Love," he said, the words sounding strange, foreign on his tongue. "A mortal concept. A weakness." "It is not a weakness," Eowyn countered. "It is a strength. It is the force that binds us together, that gives us hope, that allows us to overcome even the greatest challenges." She looked at Lorcan, her eyes filled with the love she felt for him, a love that had blossomed amidst the ice and snow, a love that had defied the ancient pact, that had changed the very fabric of their worlds. "It is the force that has brought us together," she said. That has shown us a new path. A new destiny." The Winter King remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on them, his expression shifting. The anger, the fury, seemed to fade, replaced by something else. Curiosity? Understanding? Perhaps even a flicker of respect? He looked around, at the damaged palace, at the faint signs of thaw, at the few remaining sunstone blooms. He saw the evidence of their efforts, the proof of their commitment to a different future. Finally, he spoke, his voice still deep and resonant, but less threatening, less furious. "A new destiny," he echoed. Perhaps it is possible. Perhaps the balance can be redefined." He extended his hand, not in attack, but in a gesture of truce. A willingness to consider their vision, to forge a new path. Together.
"Show me," he said.
"Show me this new destiny. Show me this love that you speak of." Lorcan and Eowyn looked at each other, their hearts filled with hope, with relief, with the promise of a future where winter and spring could coexist, where love could conquer all. The forging of a new destiny had begun. It would be a long, challenging journey, but they were ready. They had each other, and they had the blessing of the Winter King. Chapter 20. The Eternal Spring. The truce with the Winter King marked not an end, but a beginning of a long, arduous, and ultimately transformative journey. The task of rebalancing the forces of winter and spring, of creating a world where both could coexist in harmony, was not something that could be achieved overnight. It required patience, understanding, compromise, and, above all, collaboration. Lorcan and Eowyn, guided by the Winter King's cautious acceptance and fueled by their shared love and unwavering commitment, embarked on this monumental task. They traveled throughout the frozen realm, from the towering Frostborns mountains to the vast, icy plains, seeking to understand the intricate web of energies that govern the cycles of ice and snow. The Winter King, no longer a looming threat but a wary mentor, accompanied them, sharing his ancient knowledge, his deep connection to the land. He showed them the hidden pathways, the sacred places where the power of winter was concentrated, where the delicate balance between the seasons was maintained. Eowyn, drawing upon her innate connection to the earth and the power of the mark of winter, learned to coax life back into the frozen ground, to nurture the growth of plants and flowers, to create oases of warmth and beauty amidst the ice and snow. Lorcan, with his mastery over ice and snow, learned to temper the harshness of winter, to create shelters for the burgeoning life, to channel the power of the Frostborn towards preservation rather than domination. The sunstone blooms, once rare and fragile, became a symbol of their efforts, a testament to their success. Eowyn, with Lorcan's help, learned to cultivate them, to spread their influence, to create fields of vibrant crimson amidst the white expanse of winter. The Winter King, initially skeptical, gradually began to appreciate their efforts. He saw the beauty of the blooming flowers, the resilience of the burgeoning life, the harmony that was slowly emerging between the seemingly opposing forces of winter and spring. He saw the love between Lorcan and Eowyn, the strength of their bond, the unwavering commitment they had to each other and to their shared vision. And he began to understand. He began to believe. The transformation was slow, gradual, but undeniable. The frozen realm, once a desolate wasteland, began to awaken. Patches of green emerged amidst the ice and snow, rivers began to flow, animals began to return. Winter's Hold, once a solitary fortress of ice, became a hub of activity, a meeting place for the Frostborn and the burgeoning life that was slowly reclaiming the land. The Frostborn, initially wary of Eowyn and her mortal ways, gradually began to accept her. They saw her love for Lorcan, her dedication to their realm, her respect for the power of winter. And they welcomed her. They embraced her as one of their own. Years passed. Decades. Centuries. The frozen realm transformed, becoming a tapestry of winter and spring, a testament to the power of love, of collaboration, of a shared vision. Lorcan and Eowyn, their love enduring, their bond unbreakable, ruled over this transformed realm, not as king and queen, but as guardians, as protectors, as friends. The mark of winter, once a symbol of captivity, then a symbol of a chosen bond, now represented something more. It was a symbol of unity, of harmony, of the eternal spring that had blossomed amidst the heart of winter. A spring that was not the absence of winter, but the perfect balance between the two. A testament to a love that had changed a world. And it was truly eternal. They had found their forever, together. Epilogue. Centuries after the Great Thaw, after the reconciliation with the Winter King, after the blossoming of the eternal spring, Eowyn stood on the balcony of Winter's Hold, looking out at the transformed landscape. It was a breathtaking vista, a harmonious blend of winter and spring. Sparkling snowdrifts nestled beside fields of vibrant sunstone blooms, their crimson petals a stark contrast to the white expanse. Frozen waterfalls cascaded down cliffs, their icy surfaces shimmering with an ethereal light, while nearby, rivers flowed freely, their waters teeming with life. She was no longer the woman who had been dragged across the ice, terrified and defiant. The mark of winter on her wrist, now faded and almost indistinguishable from her skin, was a subtle reminder of her journey, of the ancient pact, of the love that had changed everything. Her hair, once auburn streaked with silver, was now completely white, as luminous as the snow that surrounded her, but her eyes, still the same warm brown, held the wisdom of ages, the joy of a life lived fully, a life shared. Lorcan joined her, his arm wrapping around her waist, his presence a comforting warmth against the cool air. He, too, had changed. The harshness, the icy reserve that had once defined him, had melted away, replaced by a gentleness, a warmth that radiated from within. His silver eyes, still as captivating as ever, reflected the beauty of the world they had created together. "It's beautiful," Eowyn whispered, her voice filled with awe and gratitude. Lorcan nodded, his gaze sweeping across the landscape, a soft smile gracing his lips. "It is," he agreed, "more beautiful than I ever imagined." They stood in silence for a long moment, simply appreciating the masterpiece they had created, the legacy they would leave behind. The Frostborn, now a thriving community, lived in harmony with the burgeoning life that had reclaimed the land. The cycles of winter and spring, once opposed, now flowed together, a seamless dance of creation and renewal. A young Frostborn girl, her hair as white as snow, her eyes a striking shade of blue, ran up to them, her laughter echoing through the air. She carried a bouquet of sunstone blooms, their crimson petals glowing in the soft light. "Grandmother Hyo, Grandfather Lorcan," she exclaimed, her voice filled with excitement. "Look what I've found." Eowyn and Lorcan smiled, their hearts overflowing with love. This child, and countless others like her, were the future, the embodiment of their dream, the living proof that love, collaboration, and a willingness to embrace change could transform even the most desolate of worlds. The girl offered the flowers to Eowyn, who took them, her fingers brushing against the delicate petals. She inhaled their sweet fragrance, a scent that evoked memories of her journey, of her love for Lorcan, of the eternal spring they had created together. "They're beautiful," Eowyn said, her voice choked with emotion. The girl beamed, her eyes shining with pride. "Just like you, grandmother," she said. Lorcan placed his hand on Eowyn's shoulder, his touch sending a shiver of warmth through her body. He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a love that had endured for centuries, a love that had conquered all. "Just like us," he said, his voice soft and tender. Eowyn leaned into him, her heart filled with peace, with contentment, with a love that knew no bounds, a love that had transformed a frozen wasteland into a paradise. A love that was truly eternal. The wind whispered through the sunstone blooms, a gentle song of hope, of renewal, of a future where anything was possible. A future where winter and spring danced together, forever.